Fabulous. All right, we will kick off with our very intimate small group of people today. So thank you very much for joining. Today, I was thinking as I was putting out the chickens actually in the snow in Wiltshire, today is the first day back for many, many people. And it's the first day back after, while not everybody celebrates Christmas, after some downtime globally, because things do really quieten down for a couple of weeks. And that's why I wanted to start today's session and to start the masterclass series today, because a lot of people are coming back having told themselves 2 weeks ago they were going to come back refreshed. They've got their New Year's resolutions, everything else. And then I've already had 3 sessions over the weekend with clients who have opened their inboxes and effectively had a cortisol meltdown. So I wanted to have basically this session to kick off the year around why, despite being very high performers, lots of people are still feeling exhausted. And a big challenge around this is really that we think that through mindset alone, we can drive, like we need more grit and everything else. Welcome, Annette. Welcome, Grace. How are you?
Hi,
Good, thank
good, thank you. Sorry, I've got my
Fabulous.
camera off.
No,
Yeah.
no, that's all good. That's all good. We are recording. Hopefully, it told you that. So, by all means, if you would rather not be on camera, feel free to be off camera. That's all good. Um, just to give people an idea of what to expect from the next hour or so that we've got the next 55 minutes. So, I'm going to talk a very little bit. Please jump in with questions. I've got about 15 minutes of sort of chat around the concept that we're discussing today. And if you come away with 3 key things, I've done my job. So the very first one is that energy is not purely about mindset. A lot of it is physiological, and there are things that we can do around that. The second is that by getting to know our bodies better and understand our bodies better, and it will be individual for each of us, and we'll talk about that, then we can actually maximize our energy output, but also make sure that we're showing up in every facet of life. So that's why we start with bodies in this masterclass and go bodies, careers, and then life. And then finally, the last thing is just about experimentation. So people who sign up for this kind of thing are not low achievers. You are all high achieving, high performing people. But that also means you hold yourself to very, very high standards. But when we're looking at what we're going to go through in the next 13 weeks, a lot of this will require a little bit of experimentation. And we're going to have relapses and failures when we set kind of goals for ourselves. And by that, I'll give an example. One of the things for energy is really around boundary management. And we are going to continue to fail to enforce our boundaries if it's a habit that we're used to. But us being able to self correct and be self compassionate when we're doing that is super important because every habit change, on average, has a relapse of around 9 times before we change that habit permanently. So, as we start the new year, it's a really important mindset to go in that we're experimenting with things, we're seeing what works, what doesn't, and we're reinforcing things as we go. So, as I said, I'm going to talk for about 50 minutes. I've got a couple of slides because I spent 21 years in corporate and I just can't get away from PowerPoint and Zoom, it seems. And then we're going to do kind of a live Q&A session. But as I said, while I'm talking, please do feel free to jump in and challenge anything I'm saying. This is the very first masterclass, so I'm learning as much as you are. And so if there's something I'm talking about that you want me to go into in more detail, or if you think that actually this isn't the case for you, I would love for us to have that conversation as well. So, any questions before I start? I have a question for everyone here. Has anyone had a chance to look at and do the pre-work? I know that most people only got that in the last couple of days, and it probably requires 3 to 5 days of thinking. So, anyone here been able to do the pre-work?
I've read through it, but not actually done the exercise.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Annette. Cool. All right. Well, that really helps me because I can now frame this in terms of the session being that we will look at how to take that away and then go and look at it in the future. So let's try. Oh, I have to go here. 1 second. Did not find the time yet. Cool. Thank you, Mark. I am just trying to find how to work PowerPoint, it seems. There we go. All right. So the high performer energy paradox, and everything here is paradoxical. As I said, people don't show up to this kind of thing if they're not high achievers and high performers. And it's not that you are underperforming if you're exhausted, however hard you're trying, it's actually that you're overcompensating. So, because when people are effectively very good at what they do, and when they've come through the ranks and they've performed very well, we effectively keep pushing ourselves. So, grit is an amazing thing until it becomes our enemy. Grit is really about I'm just going to push through, I'm just going to keep trying, I'm just going to persevere. And the vast majority of very successful people have high, high levels of grit. However, it can also be a bit of a weapon that we use against ourselves if we're not acknowledging physically what's going on for us. So, what we're going to talk about today is why we can drive ourselves to the stage where we're just tired but wired. So, we're showing up and we're really, really turned on, switched on, we're really focused, but actually we're physically exhausted and we're struggling to maintain that pace. As I said earlier, self compassion is really key here. So, this is not about blaming ourselves. It's not about how we motivate ourselves differently, but it's actually about understanding what's happening under the surface and what's happening in our bodies. So, we're going to need both self awareness, and when you're going through the exercise, that will hopefully help in terms of building self awareness around your different energy levels, but also self compassion. So, not beating ourselves up about habits that we do have, or perhaps not being able to reinforce our boundaries as quickly or as easily as we like, because at the end of the day, life is life. We don't live in a vacuum as much as maybe sometimes we wish we did. So let's get into what's happening in our actual bodies. I've said it a couple of times, it bears repeating. Energy is not purely effort. So it's not us just showing up and pushing ourselves harder mentally. And I say this as someone who has done endurance sports for the entirety of my life. So I can spend a long time in the hurt locker when it comes to training, and I can spend a long time in the hurt locker when it comes to work. But that's not all mental. We need to be able to understand our bodies as we're doing that. Our energy is really the output of our nervous system. So it's not about our willpower, but it's our autonomic nervous system. So that's comprised of how our bodies are being regulated hormonally, how our bodies are being regulated then with fuel, because our hormones will drive what's happening with the fuel that we put into ourselves. And the key foundation of all of that is sleep. And the reason that sleep is so important, and we're going to talk about rest, recover, perform as a cycle, but the reason sleep is so important, as annoying as that is for those of us where that's our massive development area, is that if our sleep is disrupted, we don't have the foundation to generate hormones in a healthy balance on a healthy way. So we're going to talk today about chronotypes and circadian rhythms, and how important it is that we are actually aligned with ours. And unfortunately, I think everyone here, certainly at one point in time, has worked in the corporate environment. I think most of you still do. Our environment is not set up necessarily to honor different types of chronotype. It's very, very much based still on the industrial era, where we all show up for 9 o'clock in theory, we all clock off at 5 o'clock in theory, but I've yet to meet anyone who actually does that. And most of us are not necessarily able to manage our own diaries as much as we like. So we have to have a dose of realism and self-compassion when we're talking about how we address what we're about to talk about. So the first thing is our energy, it's not mental, it's literally our nervous system output. It's what our bodies are capable of generating and how we show up. And it's also palpable. So we've all been in a room with someone who is very positively energized, and we've all been in a room with someone who is very negatively energized. I'm going to talk about negative energy in a moment and cortisol. But that's contagious. So how we show up is not impacting just us, but it's also impacting all of those around us, whether that be at home or at work. Our stress chemistry will mask fatigue for us. So our bodies are very, very good at trying to survive. It's how we've lasted this long. It's why we're the dominant species on this earth, for good or for bad. And actually, what I'm talking about when I talk about stress chemistry is two hormones critically. So one is adrenaline and one is cortisol. Everyone here will have heard about fight or flight response. I'm sure everyone's heard a number of different takes on the whole saber-toothed tiger analogy, and saying our brain is designed so that when we are posed with a threat, we can respond very, very quickly. It floods our bodies with cortisol and adrenaline, and that means we have the options of either fight or flight. So we can either run or we can stand and we can fight, but we get a huge rush chemically when we are under pressure and when we are effectively responding to high pressure situations, which for many, many people is every single day at work. The challenge is our bodies are designed to do that for the period it takes to run away or have the fight. And then in theory, we should be going back into what we call our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our relaxed system, which is sometimes called rest or digest. And in that time, we'll start to breathe out, our heart rate will slow, our body will slow, we will start to get flooded with things like endorphins, we will get flooded with oxytocin, and we'll get flooded with serotonin. Unfortunately, in the workplace, that drop off doesn't happen because more pressure keeps coming or different triggers keep coming. So it's a chronic sense of pressure. And we're continuously in that fight or flight state with lots of adrenaline and lots of cortisol buzzing around in our bodies. And eventually, the receptors for those hormones get so saturated, they stop responding at all. And that's when we have actual medical, physical burnout because the body can no longer respond to anything. It's just flat, effectively. However, the vast majority of us never get to that point. We sit somewhere in the middle on a plateau of stress. And that means we have too much cortisol and too much adrenaline in our body. And cortisol in particular is challenging because it means that our body is constantly feeling it's in a war zone. Now, this physically, yes, Nina.
Sorry, quick question. So is our body responding to the same degree if the stress is physical, like an actual lion, or if it's mental, like at work, or is it, less?
It cannot tell the difference. It doesn't know
Oh,
how. So we haven't evolved as quickly as the rest of the world around us or the world that we've created around us. Our physiology has not evolved. It's such a great question. So it really doesn't know until the point where it just gets so fatigued that it can't trigger anyway. So yeah, as far as your body is concerned, that annoying email that you saw when you opened your inbox this morning, or maybe you opened your inbox after 2 weeks and saw 500 emails, that to your body is the same as there is a lion running right at me right now. And the problem with that is there is no way we can mentally override it. So this is about our physiology. And when that's happening, a lot of other stuff is being triggered by those hormones in our body. So, for example, if you have a lot of cortisol in your body is then you're telling your liver, put lots of glucose into my blood because we're going to need the energy to run away now or to fight now. And so we get this huge spike of glucose in our system. And then we get a huge crash as soon as the brain has used that up because we're not physically running, we're not physically doing anything. So it will stay elevated for longer than it's supposed to. So we have a big high energy spike. We feel super energized, we feel super wired. And then we get a big crash after that. And it's not like we've just smashed a dairy milk, so we're not sure why. We don't understand why, but basically, our body has put glycogen into the bloodstream and then it's crashed once that's gone. And that's when we start to also get comfort eating craves because our body wants more sugar. It wants to replenish the glycogen that it now feels is missing. The other thing it does is it reduces our insulin sensitivity. So when we're eating our normal meals, let's say we have a salad for lunch, lots of protein, nice and healthy, everything else, we wouldn't expect to see a large glucose spike in the bloodstream because our insulin sensitivity is in a good place. Our body's sensitive, and it means that we then burn that as fuel. We store it in the right places. It all goes where it's supposed to. But if we're really stressed all the time, we become less sensitive when it comes to insulin, or our insulin sensitivity is lower. And that means that more is stored in our well, not stored, more is in our bloodstream for longer. And then the body, because it thinks we're in a war zone, effectively pads us out for survival. So if you're female and if you're midlife, this is a double whammy because it effectively means that we will start to store weight around our midriff and we will store weight around our hips and beyond. So, and if you're male, this is why we have lots of men in the office who are doing everything that they can at the gym but cannot get their six pack back because your body is telling you you need survival reserves because you're currently under so much stress. Okay, so that sounds terrible. There are many, many ways and many, many levers that we can throw to actually address this. But really, what it means is because we're doing this constant up and down on glucose, we feel really depleted. That's where the lack of energy comes from. And then, however much we're trying things like going to the gym, going for a run, everything else, if we're not actually understanding our hormones and our physiology and our own circadian rhythms and how we can manage our energy, then we're fighting a bit of a losing battle. And that can be really, really disheartening energy wise. So let's talk a little bit about chronotypes. So our chronotype it will generally fall into one of three patterns. We have people who are early morning larks. So the people who are the 5 a.m. club love to do their 12-step routine in the morning before the rest of us get up. We have hummingbirds, and that's the vast majority of people. So those people whose energy, they have most of their energy between about 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. And then we have night owls who it takes a really, really long time to get started. And then they're actually at their absolute peak and their absolute best at night. And they find it hard to switch off when everyone else says, right now it's time to go to bed because we're all going to start work at 9 a.m. again in the morning. So we have those three chronotypes, and we can identify our chronotype by effectively our own, like if we were to actually just let ourselves get up, be active, and then go to sleep when we wanted, you can get a very good feel of it. Obviously, there are lots and lots of wearables out there, which will also help you now determine your chronotype. But the other thing around your circadian rhythm is to, once you do know it, to start to work with it. So, for example, I'm a hummingbird. I used to think I was a morning lark, but it turned out I was just a work addict and needed to be up early to get everything done. So I'm a hummingbird. I'm most active between 10 and 4. But I do stuff like I will get up in the morning, I will walk my dog, I will get sunlight as early as possible, which can be a challenge in the UK. But I'll get sunlight as early as possible in my eyes because that's a really big trigger for your brain and for your body and for your hormones critically that actually now we are up, we are we're cranking everything up. We wake up, particularly if you're female, we wake up because our cortisol levels have started to rise. So lots of people, fasting has been very, very fashionable for the last sort of decade or so. Lots of people, lots of women won't eat then until midday. And this is not a place of judgment, whatever people want to do, but each of our single organs has effectively its own little body clock, and that body clock is triggered by food. So if we're not eating till midday, a lot of our organs, including our liver, won't kick in and won't start to really generate the right level of hormones at the right times until we've given that signal. So that can be as simple as actually having milk in your coffee or some form of protein early once you wake. It can be anything really before that sort of 10 a.m. period if you're a hummingbird, but if you're a morning lark, then you're thinking even earlier. But ideally, if you're female, you're eating within the first hour of waking. And it doesn't have to be a big meal, but you're eating something so your system knows you don't need to generate more cortisol. Because what happens is if we don't eat, the body is thinking, I need food, I need food, I need food. No food comes, it goes, I'm in survival mode now. So I'm going to generate more cortisol. My stress levels are going to go up. And then when I do eat, I'm going to store all of that. I'm not going to burn it. So if you're male, it's slightly different. And if for fasting, that can have much, much better sort of physiological results if you're looking to get that six pack back. But it's very, very different between the two genders. And if you're male, then you absolutely can fast for a long period of time. And many men find that actually that gives them a lot more clarity, a lot more energy because they're not using their energy to digest all the time. But it really is, again, about you as a unique individual. So we need to leverage our sleep and eating windows and then also movement. So only 7% of the population in the entire world, doesn't matter what your ethnic origin is, only 7% in any of the studies that have been done so far are able to exercise in the evening and then immediately go to sleep. The rest of us, the 93% who are normal, the reason why people say exercise first thing in the morning is that it will give us cortisol, but it will also give us endorphins and it will start to build metabolic health. And what we really want to do here is build muscle because the more muscle we have, the more energy we generate. The muscle is the powerhouse of the body. It's where all of the metabolic function is driven from. And the more of that we have, even when we're sat here, so I'm sitting here now, but my metabolism is burning calories regardless. And it means that actually, because my hormones are hopefully relatively balanced, I can show up with energy for this afterwards. I will, after this, because I was super excited for this call, after this, I will go into my parasympathetic nervous system because I'll be like, oh, that was fun. That was good. That wasn't a total car crash. And then I will be able to then ramp back up again shortly afterwards. It really doesn't take long to have that recovery, but there will be that recovery and I'll continue to peak. But that also happens better because in the morning I will have done a workout. And it doesn't have to be smashing out a massive run or anything else, but going to the gym or moving our bodies, building muscle, maintaining muscle, which as we get older is particularly important, then means that you have more energy as you go through the day. So it's that whole ironic and paradoxical, I'll use that term again. It's the paradox of if you don't have much energy, often the best thing you can do is exercise because it will generate more energy for you. Final point on this one, discipline is not the same as capacity. So you can be as disciplined as you like, but if you don't have the energy capacity to do things, so I'll take the example that I just used of if you are exhausted, go to the gym. If you genuinely don't even have the capacity to do that, then it doesn't matter how much you are disciplined or how much you're telling yourself that's the right thing to do. You just won't be able to do it. And the more we try and do things or the more we set commitments to ourselves and then fail on them, the more we break trust with ourselves. So it's really important. And whenever you're setting goals, particularly around things like the energy audit, that we make them small and approachable and possible because we want to build a sense of self-efficacy, not keep beating ourselves up. So the reason we end up with burnout is very often that many, many people have enough grit to keep pushing until their bodies literally just say no anymore. And so discipline is not the same as capacity, and understanding our capacity and having that self-awareness, which is where the exercise hopefully will help you, is absolutely critical. All right, just a couple more slides from me. Hopefully that's one. Okay, so why people miss this problem generally? So because everyone here is so capable, the better you are at pushing through stuff, the more you get better at pushing through stuff. So you will tolerate misalignment between what works for you and the environment you're in because you're getting rewarded all the time for it. So those triggers and the expectations of others, and very often having porous boundaries, means that we can keep pushing and we adapt rather than actually notice. So until we step back, and that's why we focus on the energy audit in the exercise, until we step back, it's easy to just get caught up in what everyone else is doing and what we think everyone is expecting of us. We also are very good as a species at adapting and at effectively adding things like caffeine, things like hours, numbing ourselves with busy work. So effectively not dealing with the main problem because we're very good at distracting ourselves by continuing to be effectively successful. And then finally, busyness does become proof of worth. So if you're in the lift at the office and someone says, "How are you?" almost automatically we all go, "Oh, busy." Almost always. And that's seen as absolutely fine and a really good thing. And eventually, if someone is super, super busy, it means they must be super, super important. So unfortunately, as a society, this is just something that has become endemic, and activity validates our identity. So that's where our sense of self-worth comes from. That makes it incredibly hard to step back and go, actually, the right thing for me is to slow down a bit or to build in deliberate recovery and rest so that I can show up and perform. And the reason why we're doing this now is many, many people will have come back from the new year with the resolution of this is what I'm going to do to start the new year. And ideally, we will build on this in each of the different masterclasses to give people the skills and the tools to make sure that they can really stick by that and start to shift their perception of worth into being someone who can rest, who can recover, and as a result, you will perform better. And because the people who attend these are leaders, the ripple effect in your organizations when people see you doing that will be enormous. So the more senior we are, we've got a choice. We can either cast a massive, massive shadow or a massive, massive light. And for those of us who continue to push through and drain ourselves and visibly start to burn out, that is what people that we work with will think is what's needed and what's expected from important people. But if we start to take care of ourselves, build in better boundaries, and do the rest, recover, perform cycle, other people will also follow that example. And I've seen this time and time again in multiple organizations, and it's an amazing thing to watch, but it takes courage for the first few leaders to start doing it. Right. Last one from me, I think, or penultimate one maybe. Really, burnout is around architecture. So it's the way in which we architect our days and how we actually use self-awareness to identify when we are starting to burn out. So because we're used to pushing through and because we're not really tuned into ourselves and into our bodies, we're not receiving the signals that are coming. So we might just have an extra cup of coffee. We might just work a couple of hours later. We might work through the weekend to catch up. And the more we're burning out, the less energy we have, the less physical capacity we actually have and emotional capacity we actually have to realize what's happening. So one of the very first things that goes when we're exhausted, and from all of the research that they've done on this, every scientific study shows if we're on less than 5 hours sleep a night, then we have no emotional capacity to be compassionate to others. So we lose our empathy and our EQ, and we lose our self-compassion as well. So we just can't tune in to the signals our body is sending us. And that means we continue to push through. We don't build in recovery buffers. So I used to be as guilty as anyone, and a lot of my clients are doing this all the time, but back-to-back meetings from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., there is no time or space for us to have that come down, go back into parasympathetic nervous system, regroup, consolidate the gains, and then come back out able to take on the next trigger, the next pressure, the next problem, the next challenge. So we need to start building this in. So that could be micro breaks where you're literally just breathing in a room in between meetings or resetting in between meetings. It might be rather than having a 60-minute meeting, you have 55 minutes as standard in your calendar. So you've got time for a bio break and to move and to actually just go and get some water or whatever it may be. But we need to have these exercises to effectively tell our bodies that they're safe. We need to be breathing deeply rather than up here and in our chest all the time. And very often when we're stressed, we're not breathing at all. So if you're listening to someone on a call and they're telling you something you don't like, if you pay attention, you'll find that you've stopped breathing altogether. So we need to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. We need to tell our bodies it's okay, because that means it will stop producing so much cortisol. It will stop producing so much adrenaline. It will allow those receptors to recover so that next time you do need to perform and you do need to do something, then those receptors are ready to receive it. And then finally, from an architecture perspective, unfortunately, the more successful we are, the more work we get given to do. So unless we set boundaries, and that's where that whole saying of like, if you want something done, give it to a busy person comes from. It's so true, because work will expand indefinitely and infinitely unless you put structural boundaries in place to protect your capacity. So unfortunately, on this one, the message is quite stark. No one is coming to save you. There will always be people who want you to do more. And that might be at work, that might be at home, that might be a collective, whatever it is. But you are going to have to save yourself with boundaries and factor in those effectively those recovery breaks so that you can reset and so that your bodies can physiologically reset and your hormones can shift to reflect the fact that it knows that you are safe. All right, so why the exercise? Why are we discussing this as the first one? It's a fairly dry topic to start with, and I know that lots of people would like to have a really quick like fix to like, how am I just going to feel more energized? And we can talk about some ways in which you can. We can talk about supplements, we can talk about sleep patterns, everything else. But first of all, the reason we've got the energy audit is just that you are tracking then your energy, not your productivity. And I've tried to keep it as simple as possible. So it's chunked into just 2-hour increments throughout the day, so that you are taking a look then at like, when am I feeling most energized? When am I feeling really drained and having to push through? And also, what was I doing? So look for patterns as opposed to causes. Again, we're looking for really positive sort of highlights as well. So notice recurring themes. When was I feeling energized? What was I working on? Who was I with? And then likewise, conversely, what was I not doing? Who was I not with? What was not draining me at the time? So we're looking for energizers and energy vampires. And the whole point of doing this for a week is that we are replacing guesswork with data. So this might not be the most normal standard week because a lot of people are having to ramp back up, but it does mean it will actually condense and highlight for you the things that are energizing you and the things that are draining you. And once we have that data, then you can start to think about, well, where do I need to draw boundaries and how realistically can I do that? Because of course, as I said, we don't work in a vacuum. We don't live in a vacuum. So we do need to think about, well, how can I start to implement boundaries and then gently reinforce them as inevitably people try to push through them or test them. So that's the purpose of the exercise. I'm going to drop my screen now because we've just got Q&A next. As I said, people haven't had a chance to do the exercise, so we might be short on questions, but let's see what people have to say. 1 second, let me stop sharing. I just have a big Nina in my screen now. And I will stop the recording now so that we can actually have an open and frank conversation if people have any questions. So.